Guyana, a beautiful country located in the Caribbean region of South America, has a lot in common with India. From language to rituals, the two countries share a lot in common, just more than a colonial past. A high-level delegation recently, led by the Foreign Minister and the Vice President, came to India. There have been 3 MOUs that have been signed on cooperation between India and Guyana on renewable energy, international framework of solar alliances, and cultural exchange. Today, we have in conversation with us Mr. David Pollard, the High Commissioner of Guyana in India, and he would talk to us about the new phase of Indo-Guyanese relationship, the post-effects of the visit, and what is the way forward. Welcome to the show, Mr. Pollard.
Thank you.
So, can you tell us in brief what was the outcome of the visit?
I think if one had to sum it up, I think it was a modernization, and I use the word recalibration, but it's probably not the right word. But it was a modernization and a recalibration of Guyana-India bilateral relations, which is to say that in 2014, the administration, if not the government in India, changed, and from a Congress-led alliance to the present NDA, National Democratic Alliance. In Guyana, about 6 or 7 months later, in 2015, there was a change of administration in Guyana too. In Guyana, our administrations tend to be long-lived. There are elections every 5 years, but generally a party that's in can stay for quite a while. And the previous administration had been in power for 23 years, I think it was. So it was quite a sea change in Guyanese politics, just as Prime Minister Modi's arrival here was a sea change in Indian politics. And this was the first opportunity that senior ministers with responsibility for diplomacy and bilateral relations had a chance to sit down together and to just evaluate, where each country had now come and what would be a more appropriate set of priorities as the countries move forward together, as opposed to relations that in practice may not really have been looked at seriously from a strategic perspective for many years.
Can you tell me how this visit has been received by the local public in Guyana, and what was the buzz and excitement around it in Guyana? How has the media interpreted it in your country?
I think there's been certainly a lot of frontline coverage of the visit. There was actually a fair bit of frontline coverage in the preparation for the visit. Since the visit itself, there has been a fair bit of coverage. I mean, our own Facebook channel has had heavy interest in our output on it, and we continue to put things out. And I think generally the Guyanese population have welcomed that very fact, the fact that we have looked at bilateral relations again and are trying to recalibrate them to what is appropriate. Equally, I think Guyana is a country where people like to see the action. I mean, they love the words and they love all the theatre of the words, but they want to see things put into action too. So I think there is a lot of goodwill, a lot of feeling that we're doing the right kinds of things. And as we speak a bit about some of the areas that we have focused on, they certainly find a resonance with the Guyanese public. But they'll also be impressed when they see the pedal hit the metal and some of the plans and projects that we speak about turn into reality or start that process.
The 3 MOUs that have been signed for cooperation, when can we actually see the projects rolling?
In some cases, the projects in a way are to some extent underway already. They have come from previous work we've done. So already with India, we have a number of lines of credit which amount to almost $100 million worth of things in areas that aren't a direct outcome of this new approach, which I'll talk about just now, but are important. There's one of them, for example, one of my favorites is there's a ferry that works, because Guyana is a very river-driven country. There's a ferry that works from Georgetown that goes actually into the ocean to get to the northwest of Guyana, which is further up. That ferry, I even know its name, is the Lady Northcote. She's older than the country. The ship is, I remember when I did national service, I traveled up to the northwest on that very ferry, and it wasn't a very comfortable experience even then. So we're very happy that one of the projects is in fact to build a brand new ocean-going ferry built in India, to traverse that route. And so there are things that are important to Guyana anyhow that are in place. But in this recalibration of relations, I think one of the themes has been sustainable development. India has been a very keen promoter of sustainable development, and looking at various parts of India, you can see why they realize that that's very important, not to damage Mother India any further because of development, to try to preserve the great country that it is. In Guyana, our country is largely untouched, but we are, and have been even under the previous administration, aware that it's important for us not to destroy our own country. So, for example, with Norway, interestingly, Norway is a very wealthy country on the back of oil, and they have a very big fund, sovereign wealth fund, and they are engaged in Guyana with a program where they pay us to keep our rates of deforestation low. And that is part of what at that time used to be called our low carbon development strategy. Now that strategy is called the Green State Development Strategy, and the emphasis is much more on looking on renewable energy and so on. And of course, renewable energy is one of the areas where India is, either one or two in terms of its progress in the world. So one of the MOUs was to do with becoming a part of the International Solar Alliance, which is an initiative led by France and India, but housed in India. And we are, and one of the other MOUs was an MOU on renewable energy in general, not just solar, but also hydro. The name Guyana means land of many waters. We have, I think, almost 72 actionable hydro sites in the country, none of which has yet been developed. So some of the real things we're hoping to see from our partnership with India in sustainable development and renewable energy is solar, grid-scale solar farms and that kind of thing, and maybe some of our hydro plants developed, and an electricity system that can take a mix of not just fossil fuels and controllable power, but also the intermittent power that you get with renewables. So there's a wide-ranging set of areas that the Indian ministers we've met have offered to provide us with technical help and support and the knowledge of their experience to help us develop those renewable and sustainable sources of energy in Guyana.
Is there anything on the cards that Guyana would invite any corporates or high-notch, top-notch officials from India to Guyana to help them in sort of doing an R&D on the country and then building on the projects that we've already signed? Very,
very much so. We've already had, there are two such visits that are being discussed and being slated. In fact, later today, India time, which is this morning, in the morning Guyana time, we're expecting that many of these plans will actually be going to be discussed with Cabinet just 1 week after the visit. So it's already at that level of urgency. But the two areas that we are expecting high-level technical visits to help us strategize. One is in the whole business of electricity, where the Ministry of, as it turns out, the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy have offered to send a team to take a look at the electricity grid in Guyana to advise on how it can be made fit for purpose for a mix of conventional and renewable energy. They've also spoken to us about the way in which they got a lot of their solar farms and solar projects developed. They talked about the difference between the CapEx model, where you've got to spend the capital expenditure to build things, or the developer model, where you use auctions of rights to get developers to build the facilities for you, which is a very interesting model for us, and various things like that. So looking at, not only at a solar farm here, a wind farm there, but helping us look holistically at how we supply electricity in our grid in Guyana and how our grid needs to be fixed for that is one of the delegations. And then from Minister Pradhan at the Ministry of Oil, in the light of Guyana's recent discovery of very, very substantial deposits of oil, and the plans for those to go into production in 2020, in a consortium led by ExxonMobil and Hess Oil of America. So this oil is not likely to stay in the ground. We already have a plan to be in production by early 2020.
But this plan had been in place to develop India in 2020 before the bilateral visit to India. How has the visit enhanced the process, and has it quickened it in a way?
Well, the visit is not so much about oil production. That is being done, like I said, in the consortium led by ExxonMobil. But what you have in Guyana is a situation where there's a country whose oil demand at the moment is currently around 15,000 barrels a day. And our very first production, which will just be the beginning in 2020, is expected to be 120,000 barrels a day. So there'll be a lot of extra oil around. What are we going to do with it? Do we need to develop new markets? There's always the option to let the consortium sell oil for you, but this is a time when a country may look at its friends and its geopolitical interests and its traditional ties, and maybe look at some of the markets that it may be interested in selling to. So that's an area they want to discuss. There's also the business of what do we do, what else can we do with the oil? I mean, people automatically say, if you have oil, you need a refinery. But in fact, the oil they're finding in Guyana is a very good quality. It's what they call a light sweet crude. Very little refining is needed. There is refining capacity in the region, even in our sister state in Trinidad and Tobago. Maybe building a refinery to make a fuel oil is not the thing to do. Maybe we should immediately look at in the medium term, maybe building a refinery to start looking at petrochemicals in general. If the work on renewable energy and COP21 is right, the demand for fuel oil itself will start to diminish in 20 or 30 years. Looking, long term, maybe it's better to look at other things if you are going to build a refinery, and you need to strategize about that. So that second team we expect will hopefully engage in discussions and strategy talks, long-term strategy talks with Guyana to help us. And to be fair, it's not only India that we're having these discussions with. Guyana is discussing with many other countries which may provide models for us in how we look at that oil resource as we go forward. But I think the delegation was very excited in the meetings they had in India about possibilities for the oil industry. And so those two high-level delegations to strategize, one about oil and one about renewable energies, those are two that we are expecting will be happening early on in the evolution of things as they go forward.
India and Guyana both are sun-rich countries. We've also signed an agreement on international framework of solar alliances. So can you tell us about the meeting in March, and can you give us details on what's going to happen and who will be the delegation, who will be leading it? The
International Solar Alliance is an international body, like I said, that was promoted by France and India. But it wanted to be, and in fact will soon be at its launch, a fully fledged international agency. That requires certain things. A country, one or two, may have a great idea. But if other countries of the world don't also think it's a great idea, you can't become a properly established international agency. So the International Solar Alliance, which really only produced its kind of agreement, the thing that defines it, about a year or so ago, in 2016, a year and a half ago, has been working hard to get other countries that may have an interest, particular solar-rich countries between the two tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, to work with them on agreeing that this is a good idea, so that means not only becoming a member of the International Solar Alliance, but also ratifying it, which is what is required in law to allow the International Solar Alliance to take effect. And that has happened in pretty record time. Guyana is even at this stage, one of the early signatories and one of the early ratifiers of the International Solar Agreement. So we will count as a founder member of the International Solar Alliance, which is something I think that we will be very proud of many years down the line. And as a result...
so there's going to be a meeting as well in March.
In March, there will be the formal launch of the International Solar Alliance here in and around New Delhi. I'm not too sure where it will be. The date is the 11th of March, and I think France and India, between them, will take the opportunity to effectively try to hold a summit of solar-rich countries. So the heads of government and heads of state from many of the countries that are founder members of the International Solar Alliance have already been invited to Delhi. Our invitation occurred during our visit, and as such we're not too sure as to what level of representation we will have. I know that ideally the head of state, President David Granger, would like to attend, but it depends on what his schedule may be. We will have more clarity on that soon. But
any other names that have been finalized would be attending?
Nothing will be finalized until the president's name is finalized. If he is there, then certain people will be in the delegation. Should he not be able to attend, then the whole structure of the delegation may be different. But there are some ministers who are keen to attend, particularly the Minister for Public Infrastructure, which is where a lot of the actual building of things like solar farms and windmills, that's under his purview. I'm sure he would be quite interested to attend. In fact, he had hoped to be in the delegation that just recently visited, but his schedule did not allow. So we don't, it's like I said, our invitation was only received last week, but we would be very much looking forward to attending that at the head of state level if possible. I think it will be quite an event in terms of the numbers of other heads of state that may attend. And that will then give an opportunity for a real share of experience because in Africa, I think, which is, as you know, a solar-rich continent, many states there are founder members of the International Solar Alliance, and many of them have had a fair bit of experience of working on joint solar projects with India. So there may be a lot to learn there at that summit on March 11th in New Delhi.
Moving on to a little bit of a culture here. This is my favorite question to all the ambassadors and high commissioners I meet. So can you just, in a very quick roundup, tell me common man view of India and Guyana? So what's the first thing to think of when you say India? I don't know how your family would have reacted when you were commissioned here, or somebody in general, an overall view of India. How is it looked at? Is it yoga? Is it colors? Is it food?
It's food is one. Bollywood is another. Cricket is a third. A bit ruefully these days when you look at the relative capabilities of the all-conquering West Indies team and the current all-conquering Indian team, yeah. But as you know, Guyana is one of the countries in the Caribbean that had a high degree of indentureship in the period after the end of slavery, and so there are a number of Guyanese who are of Indian descent. In fact, 40% or thereabouts of the population is of Indian descent. However, I think overall, there are a few of them that have traveled back to India in this generation, just so that there are few people from some of the other ethnicities in Guyana, like people of African ethnicity and people of Chinese ethnicity, people of Portuguese ethnicity. Very few of us have traveled to India. And so the view is, I think, still largely the view of people who are regarding India from abroad. Even though, like I said, there are many of the cultural and religious traditions of India live on in Guyana in various forms. Many people will still think, many people firstly engage with India through Bollywood, then through cricket, and, well, at the very first, through cuisine. There even, the foreign minister was reminding us during his visit, there are many Guyanese who consider the Guyanese version of curry to be the authentic curry, and that even Indian curry isn't really authentic, to that extent is it so embedded in the culture there. So some of those very traditional things are there, but with a more modern hat on, there is the view of India somewhere with good IT and ICT skills, good technology, clever people to do that kind of work. There is a lot of respect and regard for Indian scientific and intellectual achievements. People know about the space program, and they know about the very many bright Indians working in Silicon Valley and things like that. Anyone in the educational system is very impressed by India's tradition of achievement with some brilliant mathematicians. I remember when I was in school, we were visited by a mathematician, I'm afraid I can't remember her name, who came to Guyana, was like crazily good at mental arithmetic. And we had all the guys from our upper sixth class trying to put questions to her, like recite pi to how many numbers.
Shakuntala Devi, she was...
Very likely. This
because she was very, I remember.
She was crazy good.
She could just remember anything, numbers, add, multiply, divide, anything.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was insane.
And I remember one of our clever clogs trying to trip her up on pi, some competitions to do with pi and how many numbers it was. And he insisted in the end when she gave her, he said, "Oh, you're wrong, you know." And then she told him to check, and of course he was wrong, you know. So that sense of India as a capable country with gifted people and a lot of skills is also there in a more, you know, other than away from the traditional, you know, regard for Bollywood and that kind of thing. It's a deeper appreciation of it. But like I say, not many people have been to India, and not many people know India the way that those of us who now live here know it. And I think that was another important part of asking the delegation to be here. And that sometimes you can't really understand how things are moving and how things are changing in a country and how it's different from your perhaps old-fashioned view until you're in amongst Delhi traffic, you know, or in the IGI airport, or driving through Vasant Vihar and seeing the guys with their gold Rolls Royces and, you know, fancy S-Class Mercedes. You know, it gives you a different take on things from maybe the idea of a rural farmer with a water pump not working in a field somewhere. You know, it's good to see the other parts of Delhi, which you often don't see on the newsreels, but are immediately thrust upon you once you are here.
Thank you very much. That's quite a bit of information on Guyana. So the visit has been fruitful, it has been successful, 3 MOUs have been signed. There are also exchange of teams from India that would go to Guyana in terms of doing an R&D and taking things forward. There's another meeting slated in March for the International Framework of Solar Alliances. So there's a lot going on between India and Guyana. We'll keep you updated on more. Thank you very much for joining. I'm Tanya Tikku signing off.